Then, of course, there's the big one, and that's Me and My Shadow, which was which was originally supposed to be released last year, but it got pulled after Rise of the Guardians didn't do very well at the box office. The film, which is to be directed by Alessandro Carloni, it ran into some major story problems, and a lot of people assumed that the movie was just done for good. From what I know, that is not the case. The movie simply got removed from the slate. And when I say the slate, I mean the list of movies that have concrete release dates. Ones that have been officially announced and are on Box Office Mojo. Box Office Mojo only takes release dates if the studio outright announces them. They don't list speculative dates or dates that were kind of thrown around saying, well, this is when they intend to release it. They wait for hard cold evidence from the studios that said movies are coming out on those dates. So, yeah, basically, Me and My Shadow's not on that list. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And from what I've heard, it is happening. I am friends with a writer for an Italian Disney blog called Impero Disney, and she interviewed Alessandro Carloni. And Alessandro Carloni was born in Italy. He's from Italy, so Alessandro Carloni told her that Me and My Shadow is still going to happen. It simply got taken off the slate because the story just wasn't working. And, to be fair, you can't rush these things. And this was the problem with DreamWorks back then. They slated 3 movies for every calendar year. And the way they were going about it just wasn't working, and productions were running into the wall. And sometimes movies need a couple of years to breathe. And my philosophy is you shouldn't start animating it if the story is halfway there. You should start animating it. You should start finishing frames, single frames of the movie, once the story is all right. That's my philosophy. And, I get the sense that they probably started on Me and My Shadow and they were excited about it, but then it really wasn't working. So they gave it, they let it rest a bit so it could come together. So what happened was, from what I know, Carloni rewrote the entire film. He rewrote the story, he reimagined it, similar to how Pixar did with The Good Dinosaur. They were going to release that in May 2014, but in August 2013 they had announced that the film had been, the director had been removed, and then in September of 2013 the film was pushed back to Thanksgiving of this year. So that's essentially what happened to Me and My Shadow. It's still happening. It doesn't have a concrete release date. Back when she interviewed Carloni, this was a little while ago, Carloni said that the movie would likely come out sometime after 2017. Well, 2018 is currently locked up, so 2019 is the earliest we'll see Me and My Shadow. It all depends on how the story's going, and it all depends on what's ready and what isn't. If there's a movie ready for 2019 before Shadow, then we'll just have to wait for Shadow. But I reckon that we'll get Shadow sometime before this decade ends. It sounded truly awesome. The concept sounded really good, and the movie was going to be a hybrid. It was going to be hand-drawn, it was going to be traditionally animated, and it was going to have CG. It was going to be a combination of traditional and CG. All the scenes with the Shadow characters would be in 2D, and all the human scenes would be in CG. It makes it's a nice surreal little effect, and apparently, if it goes back into production, it will remain a hybrid film. So we can rest our worries. This isn't a Newt situation, because no matter how many times I've tried to insinuate that Newt is not ever going to die at Pixar, I think it's pretty much done. I think Pixar just couldn't tell they couldn't tell something out of what they had. They just decided to move on. Although it could get resurrected in some way or another. Again, an idea never truly dies. It just takes the right time, the right minds, the right mindsets. Like, it's got to be the right time. Maybe when they canceled Newt, they just weren't feeling it. But, again, I'm talking about DreamWorks, not Pixar. But this is Ramble. Okay, anyways, Newt. Newt, according to former Pixar president Ed Catmull, Newt was running into problems. And Pixar sought to replace the director, who was Gary Rydstrom. And Gary Rydstrom went on to direct Strange Magic for George Lucas. Rydstrom was going to be replaced by none other than Pete Docter. Now, this was around late 2009, early 2010. And Pete Docter, fresh off of Up, which had even gotten, the Best Picture nomination, the coveted Best Picture nomination, he was asked to take over Newt and improve it, fix it, like any replacement director does, or should do. And he said, well, I'll do it. I have a better idea, though. He pitched Inside Out. Bye-bye, Newt. But maybe 5 years later, 10 years later, Pixar will revisit the characters and tell a new story instead of going with the whole, they have to mate to save the species story. Because, again, that story has kind of been told before, and unfortunately Rio was coming out, and it would have beaten them to the punch. But Pixar didn't cancel the movie because of Rio. A lot of people are under the impression that they canceled it because of Rio. They did not. And, a lot of people say, well, John Lasseter confirmed it. But as far as I'm concerned, John Lasseter simply said, oh, look, great minds thinking alike. Rio coming up wasn't helping. But I think the real reason why Newt was canceled was the story. Because Pixar is still, forging ahead with their Day of the Dead film. Even though, and it's supposed to be a musical, too. Recent rumors, thanks to Randy Newman in an interview with some British podcast, I forget the name of it, he said that Lee Unkrich is doing a musical. And as we all know now, Lee Unkrich is the director of this Day of the Dead project. So they're doing a Day of the Dead musical. Well, look who just made an animated Day of the Dead musical. Look, The Book of Life. Pixar's still making the movie, regardless of the fact that another movie that's about Day of the Dead and is a musical beat them to the punch. They're still going to make it, so I highly doubt that Rio was the main reason why Newt, got canceled. I think it just had to do with the story not working, not coming together. There's nothing wrong, and I don't think it was the idea that wasn't working. It was just, storytelling is important. Your idea could be good, but it just has to be told. It needs to be executed well, and maybe Pixar just felt that, all the people at Pixar felt that they just couldn't execute it properly. They just couldn't get a 90-minute movie out of it. And, being a writer myself, I can understand the task. When you have an idea and you're trying to flesh it out, you're trying to create story situations, sometimes it comes together, sometimes it doesn't. From what I've gathered, they seem to have worked quite a few years on trying to get Newt's story right. And, it just wasn't doing anything for them, and the concept was probably boring to them. Because, if you were given the choice between newts, having to mate to save their species, kind of a love story where they're both opposites, and it's a little predictable. And then you're given this story about how your emotions are little people inside your brain. Which one are you going to go with? And that's pretty much what happened to Newt. Pete Docter said, I'll do it, but I've got this new idea I really like, so they went with Inside Out. So Inside Out is sort of kind of Newt, I guess. But there's always hope. Newt could either be revived someday down the road, or it could be done as a television special if Pixar becomes open to doing TV specials, like 30-minute TV specials that are not based on any other pre-existing franchises, like, it's not a Toy Story or a Monsters, Inc. or Finding Nemo or Incredibles themed thing. But, only time will tell. It seems like in animation land, an idea will still stick around even if the movie doesn't happen. And there have been many, movies that didn't happen at Walt Disney Animation Studios only to happen one day. I mean, Frozen, anyone? Snow Queen, stuff like that was on the table for years. Walt wanted to do a movie based on Little Mermaid. He wanted to do a movie based on Beauty and the Beast, but those never came to fruition. And, Pixar at one time, things were not working out with Cars. There's Wall-E, had a working title like Trash Planet, and those weren't coming together, and one day they finally did, and they happened. So who knows? But the good news is, over at DreamWorks, Me and My Shadow, seems like it's a go. So hopefully we hear more about it in the coming years.